I never thought I'd be writing this down, but recent events have convinced me that someone needs to know what really happens behind the walls of the Vatican. My name is Father Michael Brennan, and for the past 7 years, I've served as one of 12 official exorcists who perform ritual cleansings on Vatican staff members, not on possessed civilians or curious tourists seeking spiritual intervention. No, my work involves something far more disturbing. I perform exorcisms on the people who work here, on the priests, bishops, archivists, and guards who spend their days within these ancient walls. The Vatican doesn't advertise this position. You won't find it listed in any official capacity, and if you ask about it, you'll be met with careful denials and redirected conversations. But we exist, and we exist because we're necessary. When I first arrived at the Vatican 7 years ago, I was young, idealistic, and convinced that my theological training had prepared me for anything. Cardinal Vasari met me in a windowless office deep beneath the Apostolic Palace, far from the tourist routes and public chapels. He was an elderly man with eyes that had seen too much, and he spoke with the weariness of someone who carried secrets that physically weighed him down. He told me that my real work would begin immediately, and that everything I thought I knew about evil was about to be tested. Then, he handed me a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age and filled with handwritten notes in multiple languages. This journal, he explained, contained the rules that had kept Vatican exorcists alive for centuries. He told me to memorize every word, to never deviate from the protocols, and to understand that breaking even one rule could result in consequences far worse than death. I've copied those rules here, exactly as they appear in the journal, because I believe people deserve to know what lurks in the holiest place on earth. What I'm about to share isn't meant to discourage faith or breed cynicism. It's meant to warn anyone who might find themselves in a position similar to mine. The Vatican is ancient, and its foundations run deep, built on layers of history that predate Christianity itself. Whatever existed here before has never truly left, and the Church has learned to coexist with forces that most believers would find impossible to reconcile with their understanding of God. Rule number 1, never perform an exorcism alone. Always have at least 2 other ordained priests present and ensure that one of them is positioned at the door at all times. The entity being expelled will always attempt to escape through the weakest person in the room, and if the door is left unguarded, it will flee into the corridors of the Vatican, seeking a new host among the unsuspecting staff. I learned the importance of this rule during my 3rd week, when Father Dominic insisted on conducting a cleansing ritual alone on a young archivist who had been working in the secret archives. He dismissed my concerns, citing his 30 years of experience, and locked himself in the small chapel with the possessed woman. We found him 6 hours later, curled in the corner, his eyes completely black, speaking in a language that predated Latin. It took 4 of us 3 days to expel what had taken residence inside him, and when it finally left, Dominic aged 20 years in an instant. He never spoke again, spending his remaining days in a private wing of the Vatican hospital, staring at walls only he could see. Rule number 2. If during an exorcism the possessed individual speaks your full baptismal name, including your confirmation name, cease the ritual immediately and leave the room. Do not return for 72 hours. The entity has connected with you on a spiritual level, and continuing the exorcism will create a pathway for it to transfer into your body. I violated this rule once, in my 2nd year, during what I thought was a routine cleansing of a Swiss guard who had been experiencing nightmares and violent episodes. The moment I began the ritual prayers, his head snapped toward me with unnatural speed, and a voice that sounded like grinding stone spoke my full name, including my confirmation name that I had never shared with anyone at the Vatican, Michael Thomas Brennan, confirmed as Sebastian. The precision froze my blood. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but pride and foolish confidence made me continue. I convinced myself that my faith was strong enough to withstand whatever connection had been formed. Within minutes, I felt something probing at the edges of my consciousness. testing my defenses, searching for weaknesses in my spiritual armor. The sensation was violating, intimate in the most horrifying way. I barely managed to complete the ritual before collapsing, and for 3 weeks afterward I experienced vivid nightmares where I watched myself commit atrocities through someone else's eyes. Cardinal Vasari performed a cleansing on me, and he warned me that next time I might not be so fortunate. Rule number 3. The catacombs beneath the Vatican are divided into 3 levels. You are authorized to perform exorcisms only on the first 2 levels. If you are ever asked to conduct a ritual on the 3rd level, refuse and report the request immediately to the Cardinal Prefect. The 3rd level is not consecrated ground, and the things that dwell there are not demons in the traditional sense. They are older, and they do not respond to Christian rites. 2 years ago, Father Andreas received a request to perform an emergency exorcism on level 3. The request came through official channels, bore the proper seals and signatures, and seemed legitimate in every way. Andreas was thorough and rule-abiding, so he reported it to Cardinal Vasari before proceeding. The cardinal's face went pale when he saw the paperwork. He immediately assembled an investigation team and discovered that the request had been forged. Using stolen seals and letterhead, security footage showed no one entering or leaving the Cardinal's secretary's office when the documents were supposedly created. They simply appeared, as if manifested by intention alone. The investigation was quietly closed, the documents destroyed, and Andreas was transferred to a diocese in rural Ireland within 48 hours. I've never seen him since, but I heard he left the priesthood entirely 6 months later. Rule number 4. If you enter a room to perform an exorcism and find that all the crucifixes have been turned upside down, leave immediately and seal the door. Do not attempt to turn them right side up. Do not speak any prayers. Do not make the sign of the cross. The inversion is a sign that multiple entities are present, and they have achieved enough collective power to manipulate physical objects. Engaging with them will result in immediate possession of all present parties. This happened to me just last year in one of the residential wings where junior priests live while studying at the Vatican. A young seminarian from the Philippines had been showing signs of possession, speaking in unknown languages during his sleep, and displaying knowledge of events he couldn't possibly have witnessed. When I arrived with Father Giovanni and Father Paulson, we found the door to his room already open. The seminarian sat calmly on his bed, hands folded in prayer, appearing completely normal. But every crucifix, every icon, every religious image in the room had been inverted. The large wooden cross above his bed hung upside down from a nail that shouldn't have been able to support its weight. Smaller crosses on his desk and dresser had somehow been turned despite being glued in place. Father Paulson, young and impulsive, started forward, intending to right the largest crucifix. I grabbed his arm so hard, I left bruises and physically dragged both him and Giovanni backward. We sealed the door using the consecrated wax and prayers specified in the journal, and I reported the situation to Cardinal Vasari. A specialized team arrived 12 hours later, wearing robes I'd never seen before, marked with symbols that predated the church. They emerged 3 days later, exhausted and silent, and the seminarian was transferred to an undisclosed location. His room was stripped, blessed, and left vacant for 6 months before anyone was allowed to occupy it again. Rule number 5. During the full moon, do not perform exorcisms between the hours of midnight and 3 a.m. The veil between our world and theirs is thinnest during this window, and entities find it easier to manifest with greater power. Schedule all rituals during daylight hours, or wait until the full moon has passed. I learned this rule's importance secondhand through Father Giovanni's experience. He received an emergency call at 1:15 a.m. during a full moon, a bishop claiming that his assistant had suddenly manifested signs of severe possession and required immediate intervention. Giovanni, dedicated and compassionate, rushed to help without checking the time or the lunar calendar. He arrived to find the assistant levitating 3 feet above the ground, speaking simultaneously in 7 different voices, while objects orbited around him like satellites. Giovanni began the ritual prayers, confident in his training and experience. But during a full moon in that cursed time window, the entity didn't just resist, it attacked. Giovanni described later how the room itself seemed to come alive, walls bleeding darkness, floor rippling like water, ceiling lowering slowly as if trying to crush them all. The entity jumped from the assistant into the bishop, then back again, then into Giovanni himself for brief, agonizing moments, playing with them like a cat with captured mice. By the time 3 a.m. arrived and the entity's power waned enough for Giovanni to complete the exorcism, both the bishop and his assistant were catatonic. Giovanni himself survived, but he now has a permanent tremor in his hands, and his hair turned completely white, despite being only 43 years old. Rule number 6. If the possessed individual begins bleeding from the eyes while maintaining direct eye contact with you and smiling, you are not dealing with a demon. You are dealing with something that has been invited in willingly, something that has made a pact with its host. These cases cannot be resolved through exorcism. Exit immediately and report to the Cardinal Prefect, who will initiate Protocol Lazarus. I witnessed Protocol Lazarus once, and once was enough. A senior archivist named Dr. Castellano had been displaying concerning behavior, obsessing over certain forbidden texts in the secret archives, spending nights alone in sections that were supposed to remain locked. When his colleagues reported him, I was part of the team assigned to evaluate whether an exorcism was necessary. The moment I entered his office and met his eyes, blood began streaming from his tear ducts, perfectly symmetrical, flowing in red lines down his cheeks. But his expression remained calm, pleasant even, and he smiled at me with genuine warmth, as if greeting an old friend. He spoke clearly and eloquently about his research, about knowledge he had gained, about truths the Church had hidden for millennia. His words were compelling, seductive even, and I felt part of myself wanting to listen, wanting to understand what he had discovered. That's when I realized the danger. This wasn't possession. This was partnership. Something had given Castellano power and knowledge in exchange for access to our world, and he had accepted the bargain willingly. I reported it immediately. Protocol Lazarus was enacted within hours. I don't know what happened to Dr. Castellano after they took him away, and I've learned not to ask questions about Protocol Lazarus. The few people who know its details refuse to discuss it, and there are no written records of its procedures. Rule number 7. Never consume food or drink offered by someone you are scheduled to perform an exorcism on, even if the ritual is days away. Entities can influence their host to prepare substances that weaken spiritual defenses or create pathways for possession. All exorcists must fast for 12 hours before any ritual and consume only blessed water and consecrated bread during the fasting period. This seems simple enough, almost obvious, but the entities are clever and patient. Father Luca fell victim to this 3 years ago. A Monsignor he was scheduled to cleanse the following week insisted on having lunch with him, claiming he wanted to discuss the upcoming ritual and his concerns about the process. Father Luca, being kind-hearted and pastoral, agreed. They shared a meal in one of the Vatican's private dining rooms, consuming food prepared by the Vatican's own kitchens, seemingly safe. But within hours, Luca began experiencing symptoms. Disorientation, gaps in memory, finding himself in locations with no recollection of how he arrived. When the scheduled exorcism occurred, Luca was useless, unable to complete prayers, his Latin confused and jumbled. The entity in the Monsignor laughed at him, speaking through its host about how easy it had been to compromise Luca's spiritual defenses through that shared meal. It took 3 other exorcists to complete the ritual, and Luca required his own cleansing afterward. He now follows the fasting protocols religiously, refusing to eat anything not personally blessed by Cardinal Vasari for 24 hours before any ritual. Rule number 8. The papal apartments on the 3rd floor contain a locked room marked only with a bronze plate bearing the number 13. Under no circumstances are you to enter this room, even if you hear voices calling for help from inside. The room is not part of any official floor plan, and its existence is not acknowledged in Vatican records. If you are called to perform an exorcism and find yourself being directed toward this room, the entity has gained enough power to manipulate perception and create false commands. Leave the building entirely and perform a self-cleansing ritual before returning. I discovered this room by accident during my first year, when I got lost in the maze of corridors and apartments that comprise the papal residence. The bronze plate caught my eye, oddly out of place among the ornate decorations and religious art that covered every other surface. I reached for the handle out of curiosity, but before I could touch it, Cardinal Vasari appeared, seemingly from nowhere, and physically pulled me backward. His reaction was violent, uncharacteristic of the gentle man I'd come to know. He screamed at me, actual screaming, demanding to know who had told me about the room, who had directed me to this corridor. When I explained that I'd simply gotten lost, he didn't believe me at first. He interrogated me for over an hour, making me recite prayers, testing whether I was under any form of influence. Finally satisfied that my discovery was genuinely accidental, he made me swear on my ordination that I would never approach that door again, never speak of it to anyone, and never investigate its history. That night, I dreamed of the room constantly, dreams where I opened the door and found impossible things inside, ancient artifacts that couldn't exist, texts written in languages that predated human speech, and in every dream, something aware of my presence, something patient and old, watching me with anticipation. The dream stopped after Cardinal Vasari performed a blessing on me, but I still sometimes find myself in that corridor in my mind, staring at that bronze plate, wondering what requires such absolute prohibition in a place already filled with secrets. Rule number 9. If you are performing an exorcism and the entity begins speaking in perfect Latin verse, reciting scripture backward with correct meter and rhyme, immediately invoke the Seal of Solomon and retreat to the nearest consecrated chapel. You are not dealing with a simple demon. You are confronting a fallen angel, and they require specialized protocols found only in the Grimoire Angelorum kept in the Cardinal Prefect's personal safe. No exorcist below the rank of bishop is authorized to engage with such entities alone. I encountered this situation 9 months ago during what was supposed to be a routine cleansing of a translator who worked in the Secretariat of State. The moment I began the opening prayers, the young woman's voice changed, becoming impossibly resonant and beautiful, filling the room with sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. She recited the Gospel of John backward, each word perfectly metered, creating an unholy poetry that was simultaneously blasphemous and aesthetically perfect. I recognized immediately what I was facing and invoked the Seal of Solomon, tracing the 6-pointed star in the air with blessed oil while reciting the prescribed prayers. The entity laughed, not with mockery but with genuine amusement, and spoke directly to me in a voice that made my bones ache. It told me things about myself that no one could know, revealed secrets about the Vatican's history that I later confirmed were true, and offered me knowledge and power beyond imagination. The temptation was overwhelming, physical in its intensity, and I felt myself wavering, considering its offers. Only the years of training and the muscle memory of ritual prayers saved me. I retreated to the chapel of St. Peter, where I remained for 3 hours, praying and fortifying my spiritual defenses. Cardinal Vasari himself handled the fallen angel with protocols I wasn't permitted to witness. The translator survived, but has no memory of the possession, which the cardinal assured me was a mercy. Rule number 10. Every exorcist must maintain a personal journal documenting each ritual performed, including date, time, location, entity characteristics, and outcome. This journal must be written in your own hand, in a language you spoke as a child, and kept in a locked box made of blessed silver. The journal serves as a spiritual anchor, grounding you to your identity and purpose. If your journal ever goes missing or is stolen, report it immediately and undergo a full spiritual audit. An entity in possession of your journal has gained intimate knowledge of your experiences and weaknesses. My journal is written in Irish Gaelic, the language my grandmother taught me as a child, filled with 7 years of nightmares and supernatural encounters. I keep it in a silver box that was blessed by 3 bishops, locked with a key I wear around my neck at all times. Last year, I woke one morning to find my door unlocked and the silver box opened, its lock unbroken, the key still around my neck. My journal was missing. The violation felt deeply personal, as if my mind had been ransacked while I slept. I reported it immediately to Cardinal Vasari, who initiated an investigation and subjected me to the most thorough spiritual examination I've ever experienced. For weeks, I was monitored constantly, required to perform additional prayers, forbidden from conducting exorcisms until they could determine if I'd been compromised. The journal reappeared exactly 30 days after it vanished, placed neatly on my desk, with no explanation of where it had been or who had taken it. When I opened it, I found new entries written in my own handwriting, describing rituals I had never performed, encounters I had never experienced, and knowledge I didn't possess. The entries were detailed and compelling, written in my style, and for brief, terrifying moments, I questioned whether I had actually written them during some fugue state I couldn't remember. Cardinal Vasari examined the journal and determined that an entity had stolen it to study my experiences and thought patterns, then returned it with false memories intended to confuse and destabilize me. Those pages were carefully removed and destroyed through sacred fire, and I underwent another month of spiritual cleansing before being cleared to resume my duties. Rule number 11. The Vatican gardens contain 7 statues placed at specific points forming a heptagram. These statues are not decorative. They are containment markers for something buried beneath the garden's center. Never perform an exorcism within the boundaries of this heptagram. The entity you are expelling may attempt to escape into what lies beneath, and awakening that presence would have catastrophic consequences. If an exorcism must be performed on someone who works in or near the gardens, relocate them to a chapel at least 100 meters from the nearest Serst. I learned about the heptagram from Father Giovanni, who accidentally discovered it while researching the Vatican's architectural history. The 7 statues appear innocuous to tourists and visitors, depicting various saints in poses of prayer or contemplation. But when you map their locations precisely, they form a perfect 7-pointed star with the garden's central fountain at its exact geometric center. Giovanni became obsessed with discovering what they contained or protected, spending months researching archives and interviewing elderly priests who had served at the Vatican for decades. His research was abruptly halted when Cardinal Vasari personally intervened, confiscating all his notes and forbidding him from pursuing the subject further. Giovanni told me in a moment of weakness over late-night wine that his research had uncovered references to something called the Voynich entity, a presence that predated the Vatican itself, something that had been contained by the early church using knowledge borrowed from pre-Christian mystics. He said the containment required constant maintenance through prayers spoken in rotation by specific priests trained in ancient traditions. He mentioned that the rotation had never been broken in over 1,000 years, and that breaking it would be apocalyptic. Giovanni died 6 months later of a sudden heart attack. He was 34 years old with no history of heart problems. His research notes were never found among his belongings. Rule number 12. If you ever encounter a child within the Vatican walls after sunset, do not approach them, do not speak to them, and do not make eye contact. Children are not permitted in the Vatican complex after dark, and what appears to be a child is always something else wearing an innocent face. Report the sighting immediately to security and avoid that area for 48 hours. I saw the child 3 times before I understood what it was. The first time, I encountered a young girl, perhaps 7 years old, wearing an old-fashioned dress, standing in a corridor outside the Apostolic Library at nearly midnight. She looked lost and frightened, and every pastoral instinct urged me to help her. I approached, intending to find out where her parents were and how she'd gotten into a restricted area after hours. But as I got closer, something felt wrong. Her eyes, though seemingly normal at a distance, had no depth up close, like painted glass rather than living tissue. Her breathing didn't match her chest movements, creating an uncanny valley effect that made my skin crawl. I backed away slowly, maintaining visual contact without direct eye contact, and reported the sighting to Vatican security. They found nothing, but they took my report seriously, logging it in their incident records. The second time I saw her, she was standing outside my apartment door at 2 a.m, facing away from me, perfectly still. I didn't approach. I retreated to a colleague's room and spent the night there. The third time, I saw her during an exorcism, standing in the corner of the room, visible only to me. She smiled, revealing too many teeth, and I understood finally what she represented. She was a psychopomp, a spiritual scavenger that fed on the energy released during exorcisms, drawn to the Vatican by the constant flow of supernatural activity. Cardinal Vasari explained that she was relatively harmless as long as you didn't engage with her directly, but that acknowledging her existence could give her power and permission to interact more overtly with our world. I've seen her 17 times now, always in different locations, always after dark, always watching and waiting.